termite horror stories. I've personally put my foot through balcony decks in the past that were infested.
The people have demonstrated, in Western countries at any rate, that they do not believe the elephant should be sacrificed to fashion.
Welcome to the Science Edition. I'm Stuart McLean. If you allow yourself to dwell on it just for a moment, it's frightening to think that the world is losing about 3 species each day. But did you know the World Wildlife Fund is predicting this genetic annihilation could soar to the loss of a species each hour by the year 2000? And once gone, species never return. They're just gone. Lost forever, gone. Animals and plants are being destroyed by the thousands as the cities and the roads of civilization expand. At one end of the chain are the almost microscopic creatures that may inhabit a small pool of water in the way of a hydroelectric project. At the other end are the species hunted down with Land Rovers and high-powered rifles for trophies, or so their hides or their tusks can serve the latest trends in fashion. Well, we now learn that we're facing the possibility of the extinction of the African elephant. Demand for their tusks and human encroachment on their feeding grounds have brought them close to the edge of forever. Caroline Davidson recently spoke with Richard Leakey. He's the Director of Wildlife Services in Kenya. He was in Toronto to attend a fundraising dinner, and they discussed the plight of the African elephant. We're going to have that conversation in just a moment. That's how we're going to begin this week's show. But as hard as Leakey and other scientists are working to save some species, there are actually other researchers who are working to eradicate other creatures. Take the termite, for instance. Later, we'll join a team from the University of Toronto as they try to learn more about these tiny home wreckers and watch them struggle to devise a non-toxic method of getting rid of them. But first, here's our conversation with Richard Leakey.
The beauty of the ivory tusk has caused the downfall of the African elephant. Poachers have slashed their numbers in half. Measures have been taken by CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, to counteract the slaughter.
If we're going to save the elephant, not only is CITES important, but the attitude of the public at large is even more important. And I think the people have demonstrated, in Western countries at any rate, but in other countries as well, that they do not believe the elephant should be sacrificed to fashion. And I believe we've got to maintain the pressure, we've got to maintain the heat, and we've got to persuade decent folk in Canada and elsewhere that the wearing of ivory and the use of ivory in jewelry and decoration, either of oneself or one's home, simply is not acceptable if the elephant is to survive.
How do you actually deal with the poachers? How can you stop them, and what measures does one have to take to deal with that?
And you've got to remember that the poachers are armed, they're felons, they carry arms. These are people who are oftentimes trained in combat, they're ex-soldiers, and these are men who wouldn't hesitate for a moment to pull the trigger on any wildlife ranger or warden, or indeed, as we've seen sadly, they've even killed tourists. These are rough, tough, merciless bandits who have until recently been roaming freely in our parks. Now, to combat them, we've got to have, first of all, men who carry arms that are at least equivalent to those they're up against. We've got to give the men shoes and boots. We've got to give them radio communications. We've got to give them a tent to sleep in at night. We've got to give them a salary that is compatible with the risks that they're taking.
Have you actually seen how these elephants have been slaughtered in the wild?
Oh, yes, and it's a tragedy. When an elephant is shot, usually these poachers want to maximize, and you will see perhaps a herd of 15 or 20 animals, ranging from bull, cows, young animals, baby animals. The average weight of the ivory is relatively small, but this was a family unit. This was a unit that probably talked to individuals, that did things together, that had shared experiences, that had inherited wisdom. This is a group of animals that are highly social, and suddenly they're mowed down with automatic rifles. Then these bandits and poachers take an axe and they slice through the head of the animal to produce these sort of animals with half a head, and the blood and the gore. It's absolutely appalling, the carnage that you see. This is the image that I think people have identified with stopping the ivory trade, and it's the right image.
What do you say to other African nations, Zimbabwe, for example, who maintains that because they cull their elephants and don't massacre them, that the ivory, the money they get from the ivory trade is crucial to the revenue and to their society.
I hope, and I know this is the view of Kenya, that Zimbabwe will review its position and perhaps take a slightly more moderate line on the question of insisting that ivory trade continue. I believe Zimbabwe can well afford to stand a little taller and join the rest of us in a continental endeavor to save the elephant by taking pressure off the herds by eliminating the trade. If it's going to cost Zimbabwe $1 million, $1.5 million, even $2 million a year for a few years, I believe Zimbabwe can afford to make that contribution to such a worthy cause. We'll see. I think they will.
Can we leave Africa for a moment and go to the Far East, to Hong Kong, to Japan, which I think consumes about 40% of the ivory? What can be done? Is the onus on them to start changing their attitudes and conform to the ban?
Japan has come out in favor of the ban. Japan has declared its willingness to abide by the CITES agreement. On the other hand, I think we should recognize that the stockpiles of ivory in Japan and Hong Kong, Singapore and Taiwan are stockpiles of ivory that it has a value. The people who have it have paid a lot of money for it. They want to minimize their losses, and they're going to try and sell that ivory slowly, slowly to whatever few places they can find that'll buy it. The one thing those people are not going to do is buy any more.
John Donne wrote a poem once saying that the elephant was the only harmless great thing. Is the elephant harmless?
No, it's not, and I think people forget that while elephants are magnificent and beautiful, if you're a farmer, they're a very different thing, and I believe that one of the major challenges for the future of the elephant, in Kenya at any rate, is to make sure the elephants stop wandering across people's farmland and destroying fences and water tanks and making millions of dollars worth of damage every year to Kenya's agricultural economy. This is why I often have spoken about the need to raise money for fencing. We've got to secure the boundaries of some of these parks where we have an interface between wildlife and agriculture. And this is a very challenging and a very expensive task, but it's a task that is certainly as important as anti-poaching, and it would be my next commitment to protect the people now from the animals, having protected the animals from the people.
Dr. Leakey, do you feel that this ban on the ivory trade will actually strengthen the elephants, the herds, it will replenish them, and that they actually will grow back in full force?
I believe the elephants will come back. I believe we can move to a very optimistic situation where we once again will have to worry not about too few, but too many. That's a legitimate worry, and one that I think we need to anticipate, but it's a happy worry in a sense.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leakey.
Thank you.
A new $50 bill to be unveiled this week will be the first in the world to use a new technology to foil forgers. Holograms were tested, but they weren't durable enough for paper money, so instead, a small patch made of many layers of silica and zirconia will be attached to the front of the bill. The layers will produce a 3D effect, making it impossible for the bill to be photographically duplicated. Two prominent women have recently joined the board of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, noted psychologist Dr. Reva Gertstein and former Ontario Health Minister Dr. Betty Stevenson. The Institute promotes private sector involvement in basic scientific research. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney's back in Canada, and a visit to Moscow was productive on a variety of science fronts. Agreements were reached concerning protection of the ozone layer, information exchanges regarding Arctic pollution, and the possibility of a joint Soviet-Canadian space venture. Well, finally, the holiday gift season is upon us, and many environmental groups are providing alternatives to the old standbys of ties or slippers. You can adopt a whale in the name of any of your friends or relatives, and with the donation, they'll get a picture of a whale and membership in the International Wildlife Coalition. Similar programs offer you a chance to adopt a peregrine falcon, or like last year, help protect a piece of the rainforest. Or if you like closer to home, there's projects to protect forests in Ontario and British Columbia.
If you understand that a single eastern subterranean termite weighs approximately 3 milligrams, then what you have with 3 million insects foraging over a kilometer is essentially an animal the size of a medium-sized dog.
It happens in the best of neighborhoods. It comes without warning. And by the time it's discovered, it's almost always too late. Termites. They literally eat the roof, the porch, or the floors, and they do it secretly, almost invisibly. The only evidence they leave, the wood, has been eaten away to a fragile shell. There are more than 1,000 types of termites in the world, most of them living in the tropics. The only species living in Ontario is the eastern subterranean termite.
We believe termites originated in Ontario back in the 1920s, down in the Essex County, Point Pelee area, and we believe it was initially brought over from either structural lumber or firewood or something like that sorts from the U.S. side. And from there it's tended to spread through the Essex County area. We found other infestations coming into Ontario through Toronto, and also it seems to be very patchy in certain municipalities wherever we had a sort of railway and lumber yard situation.
Since their introduction, termites have turned up in more than 20 Ontario municipalities, from Point Pelee in the south as far north as Kincardine. The heaviest termite infestation is in Toronto. They first arrived in industrial sites in the city's waterfront area. Since then, they've slowly spread to the east end and a few pockets in the west. Each termite is about the size of a grain of rice. Blind, fragile insects, termites need warmth and moisture or else they will dry out, so they spend most of their time underground. When they must go above ground to find food, they painstakingly construct earthen shelter tubes. These tubes run along walls and foundations and allow the termites to move to new food sources. Termites are social insects living in complex and interrelated societies. Their underground swarms can have huge populations numbering in the millions. Within the swarm, there are several different castes or groups. The primary reproductives are the largest. These dark-colored termites develop wings, which enables them to leave the colony and mate with termites from other swarms. Although common in the United States, primary reproductives are seldom found in Canada. In Ontario, it's another caste of secondary reproductives that do the egg-laying work. These kings and queens are the only members of the colony who produce young. In fact, they release a chemical which inhibits any other members of the swarm from becoming fertile. If they're lost or killed, the absence of that chemical allows other sterile termites to alter, become fertile, and take their place. The most menacing-looking members of the termite family are the soldiers. But although their weaponry gives them the appearance of a house-wrecking termite, they aren't the culprits. Instead, they protect the clan from invasion by quickly attacking intruders. The most numerous termites are the workers. They build and maintain the tunnels. But the workers' main responsibility is feeding the colony. Termites are unique in the insect world in their choice of food.
Essentially, termites feed on cellulose, and that could be in the form of lumber, it could be paper. There are several articles as well that contain cellulose fiber. And the worker stage of the termite actually feeds on this material, takes it back to their colony, which is situated in the soil, and they feed that to the other members of the colony.
The worker termites' tireless search for food brings them squarely into conflict with humans. The dry, dead wood in buildings makes an accessible and attractive meal. And since they come silently, stealthily out of the ground along their earthen tubes, they are usually well established before they're discovered.
There are numerous termite horror stories. I've personally put my foot through balcony decks in the past that were termite infested. I've seen stairs that one could not stand on that had to be roped off. And yes, indeed, the fridge has actually gone through the kitchen floor on occasion. They can do a significant amount of damage.
Normally, before things go too far, a homeowner suspects that there might be termites in the house and calls in an inspector to take a look. He starts in the basement where termite infestation most often occurs. Evidence, if there is any, will be hidden away from easy detection. This time, the news is bad. The homeowner was right. This tube means that worker termites are taking away pieces of this house bite by bite to feed their colony. The owner should act quickly to shut obvious termite entry points, breaking any contact between the earth and wooden parts of the house. Then it's time to call the exterminator. There is only one defense against termites, and it's a drastic solution. A wall of pesticide must be built around the foundation. Every 12 to 18 inches, deep holes are sunk in the ground around the house, the basement floor, interior and exterior walls. Next, a pesticide is pumped into the holes to permeate the soil. The aim of these injections is to build what's called a chemical barrier around the building. Once the pesticide soaks into the ground and stabilizes, termites can't move between their underground colony and their food sources in the house. This treatment isn't an ideal solution. It leaves a significant residue of pesticide in the ground, but so far it's the only method that exists for dealing with termites. That's largely because not much is known about them, and so it's difficult to come up with ways of controlling them. At the University of Toronto's Faculty of Forestry, researchers are trying to discover more about Ontario's termites.
We are taking the approach to termite control that one must understand the behavior of the insect first. There really hasn't been a lot of research on termites in Canada for obvious reasons. They're only found along the southern border. And we really don't know as much as we should about the behavioral differences between termites here in the north and termites in other regions of North America.
The first step is to try to know the enemy, to find out more about termites and their hidden world. Dr. Grace's team uses an innovative technique. Captured termites are fed a red material that acts as a dye, turning their bodies a pale pink color. When they're mixed with normal white termites in a natural setting, these dyed termites will stand out clearly. Test sites have been carefully identified on the edge of an existing underground termite colony, and plastic pipes have been buried at selected locations. Inside these termite traps are smaller pipes lined with cardboard, a favorite termite food. The dyed termites are placed in a few selected sites to mingle with the workers as they come to feed on the cardboard. Several days later, all the traps around the colony are examined. The spread of the dyed termites and a count of the total number of termites in all the traps will help the team to estimate the size and population of the colony and chart its movements.
We found that subterranean termite colonies in Ontario are quite a bit larger than we'd previously estimated. What we have found is that the insects are covering areas as large as a square kilometer, which is quite large for a termite colony, with populations, at two sites where we've actually measured the population size. We've estimated it at 2.1 million termites, 2 million termites, and 3 million termites at a second site. That's quite a few insects. Now, if you understand that a single eastern subterranean termite weighs approximately 3 milligrams, then what you have with 3 million insects foraging over a kilometer is essentially an animal the size of a medium-sized dog moving over this site, feeding on all the wood it can find.
The team is also looking for ways of controlling or even killing termites with pesticides that will be safer and more effective than the chemicals currently in use. To do this, they've had to devise a special test environment.
It's actually a small sandwich. In the sandwich, the glass sandwich, just consisting of 2 microscope slides, we place a pesticide-treated soil. Termites are then placed in one vial on one side of this sandwich, and then they're allowed to travel freely through the soil in the sandwich to another vial containing a piece of decayed wood. It's decayed with a fungus that is particularly attractive to termites. This gives us a measure of the repellency of the material. Now, if a soil pesticide is repellent to the insects, then it will indeed keep them out of the structure. On the other hand, it won't kill them very effectively. If it's toxic to them but not repellent, then they'll go into it and they'll die.
The researchers are also hoping to find ways of making termites do the exterminators' work for them. They're searching for a substance that will act as bait, something the termites will like and carry to the colony as food. This bait could carry a camouflaged organism which, when it arrived back in the colony, would kill the other termites.
The advantage of a bait over a soil treatment with a conventional pesticide is that one's putting out a very small amount of toxic chemical. That bait can be picked up and removed when the problem no longer exists. The termites themselves are spreading a very small amount of it in their feeding. The advantage of a biological agent now in a bait of that sort, of course, is even better. Biological agents, fungi, or disease organisms for insects tend to be very safe to human beings.
But most serious research is still at the stage of simply gathering more information about these secretive insects. And until researchers do find new pesticides, baits, or barriers, the problems of termites will remain the same. We won't notice them until they strike, usually after they're well established, and we won't be able to kill them. Just drive them away, passing the problem along to someone else.
There's many trials and tribulations of big city living. Infestations of termites and even more common insects like cockroaches are just part of the price that many pay when they choose to live in the midst of the action. Cities are also crowded, dirty, dangerous, and noisy. In fact, next to clean air and possibly a swim in a cool, clean lake, the most common response to why are you heading to the country has to be for some peace and quiet, of course. And next we're going to look at not how to avoid noise, but how noise is measured.
When we say a sound is loud, we're talking about how we perceive it. In reality, sound is measured by its power of intensity. The human ear can hear a broad range of sounds, from the gentle rustling of leaves to the loud noise of a jet engine. Sound is caused by vibration of air. As these sound waves travel through the air, they strike the eardrum. From here, a series of tiny bones and hair fibers in the inner ear translate the vibrations into signals the brain interprets. Our ability to hear such a wide range makes sound difficult to measure. To enable them to measure any given sound, scientists developed the decibel system, a non-linear scale using ratios to compare the intensities of loud sounds to those of softer ones. When a 10-fold increase in intensity hits the human ear, it is registered as just a doubling in loudness. In the decibel scale, that 10-fold gain is represented by an increase of 10 decibels. For example, a 70 decibel sound is 10 times louder than a 60 decibel sound. The scale allows the entire range of audible sound pressure level, or intensities, to be measured in a convenient way, from 0 to 140 decibels. 0 represents the faintest audible sound. For most people, the average level of conversation is 60 to 80 decibels. Sounds above 130 decibels become painful. We can handle a sudden high intensity, but our hearing is diminished when the noise is prolonged. We can rate common situations and activities using the decibel scale. Normal breathing is 10 decibels. An orchestra rehearsing softly is 30. A hairdryer is 70 decibels. Many industrial workplaces have decibel levels of 85. This is a level where hearing damage can begin. A lawnmower is 90 decibels. Rock bands can have sound levels of 110 decibels. At this level, regular exposure of more than 1 minute risks permanent hearing loss. A jet taking off has a level of 130 decibels. This is a threshold of pain. At Pearson International Airport in Toronto, equipment has been installed to monitor the noise of the aircraft. There are 13 monitoring stations. Most are positioned along flight paths, while a few are scattered in the surrounding community. A pole-mounted microphone gathers the noise information and transmits it to the equipment that converts the sound pressure level to digital readout. This information is then transmitted to a central processing station where noise level information can be stored and monitored. Aircraft manufacturers are constantly working to reduce the decibel levels of their jets, but for the time being, it's unlikely that any of them will manage to bring the noise of a jet engine down into the low decibel range to join quiet chats, waterfalls, and rustling leaves.
On December the 5th, the Academy of Canadian Cinema and Television will gather in Toronto to salute the best in Canadian broadcasting for the past year, and all of us here at the Science Edition wanted to wish the nominees the best of luck. But special good wishes go to TV Ontario's David Chamberlain and his production team on the series Organic Chemistry 2. They have a nomination in the Best Animated Program or Series category. The nominated episode, Life After Chemistry, deals with the how, what, and whys of compounds such as PCBs and dioxins. And this is an international award winner, but it's not a program many of you would have seen, but it represents some of the best viewing from another facet of our broadcast day. It's one of the programs designed around the school curriculums that are seen by thousands of students in classrooms across the province and, in fact, around the world. Well, that's it for the Science Edition this week. I hope you can join us next week for another look at the science behind the news. Until then, on behalf of the Science Edition, I'm Stuart McLean.
For more information about ecological gifts, write to us at The Science Edition, TV Ontario, Box 200, Station Q, Toronto, M4T 2T1. Join us next week for part 2 of our interview with Richard Leakey, a personal profile.